There's few things I could say to properly introduce the subject of today's video, so I'll just let him introduce himself.
Hi, I'm John Kiriakou. I hope you enjoy this film, although I don't know why you would. I'm not particularly interesting. I guess I am a good storyteller, but maybe through some creative editing we can make this into something fun. In the meantime, I hope you enjoy whatever food you decided to eat and whatever poop you decided to poop when you sat down to watch this. All the best.
And that is the understatement of the century. John has lived one of the most interesting lives of possibly anyone I've covered. So make sure you stick around until the end of the video. Also because I've paid $400 for that, and it helps me out a lot. Hi, I'm Crate13, and I left my suit in a different state on accident, so I had to bust out the blue one today. If you're anything like me, John Kiriakou has been quite literally everywhere on your social media lately. Whether it's deep analytical breakdowns of the geopolitical situation or just memes.
We fired 47 cruise missiles into Iraqi intelligence service headquarters.
But by then it was the middle of the night in Baghdad.
And we killed the janitor.
So I asked the question, who is he? Who is the real John Kiriakou? And why is he everywhere right now? John was born in Pennsylvania in 1964 and raised in the city of Newcastle. He was the grandson of 4 Greek immigrants, all from the Isle of Rhodes, and his parents were school teachers. Growing up, John had 2 major passions: spycraft and learning about the Middle East. The former he credits to overhearing a conversation between his parents and a family friend whose relative was Richard Welch, who was a CIA officer in Athens who was assassinated by Marxists in 1975. And at the time, he was the highest-ranking officer in the CIA to ever be killed. Now, to his family, this was just a conversation regarding their homeland. But to John, this was a moment that sparked a flame of curiosity that started out small at first. He began to ask his parents for small spy toys, like invisible ink and stuff like that. But eventually, it would carry him forward into his career later in life. As he got older, John began to read and study up on the Middle East, as he just found the history and culture to be fascinating compared to that of Western civilizations. And as a high school graduate in 1982, this, coupled with his intelligence, made John a prime candidate to be an intelligence officer. However, this wouldn't happen just yet. John would take his talents to George Washington University, where he would receive a bachelor's in Middle Eastern Studies and would receive a master's degree in legislative affairs. John's plan was to go the route of working for the State Department and maybe eventually working for an embassy. Before he graduated with his master's degree, John would take a psychology class with Professor Jared Post. Post, by all accounts, was a Renaissance man in every sense of the word. He held multiple degrees in multiple subjects from multiple Ivy League universities such as Harvard and Yale. But by all accounts, this was just a normal class that Kiriakou enjoyed. But his life would change forever after one assignment in this class. Their goal? Have an interaction with someone they know outside of class and write a psychological evaluation about this person. So he chose someone that everyone, I think, could relate to having an interaction with that could be interesting. His own boss. John worked at a food workers union at the time and decided to have this interaction with his boss on a not so good a day. One thing was said and another thing was said. Eventually, John would call his boss a racist, to which his boss would rear back, attempting to hit him, but eventually stopped himself and just verbally reprimanded him, to which John quit on the spot. John wrote a report about the incident and his now former boss and diagnosed him as a sociopath with psychopathic tendencies. He turned in his paper and he made 100. But there was a note at the bottom of his paper saying 2 things. First, that the professor agreed with his diagnosis and I'm glad that he quit. And 2, to meet him in his office after class. So he goes with Professor Post into his office, and it's here he tells John that he's not really a professor of psychology at all. In all reality, he is a CIA agent, and he picked out John to be a perfect recruit because 1, he needed a job now, and 2, he thought John himself had sociopathic tendencies without being a full-blown sociopath. Now, this may sound like an insult at first, but in reality, this is a good thing, meaning John has a great ability to lie. Well, at the same time, he has a conscience and feels bad about doing it. So John thinks this sounds pretty exciting. So he agrees and then proceeds to do all kinds of small little tests going to all these different little locations to eventually get to the real test that he has to take, which he blows out of the water and passes with flying colors. And after showing off his critical thinking skills and knowledge of geography, he joins the CIA. So when he got there were a few posts that wanted him, but none of them were covert assignments. Anywhere John was going, he was going to go as John. So he accepted a post in January of 1990 in Iraq. At this point, this was supposed to be a quiet post. Iraq and Iran had just wrapped up a decade-long war that cost Iraq millions of lives, and they gained nothing from it, which definitely won't happen in the current war that we just started with Iran. But anyway, my point is, no one expected anything major to pop off in this part of the world anytime soon. John was told he would serve here for a year to learn the ropes, since it was going to be such an easy job, and then after that, he could transfer to a more fun operation location like Romania. So while he was there, he became the lead biographer on Saddam Hussein, the Iraqi leader, which again, at this point, hardly a single American would be able to name him. So this goes on for another 6 months, with John just studying up on the Ba'athist leader until the end of June. As it was here, Kiriakou sounded off the alarm that Iraq might be planning to go to war with its southern neighbor, Kuwait. Now, the reason for this may not actually be for what you were taught. You see, the Kuwaitis had been drilling oil along the Iraqi border as there was a massive oil field that ran across their border. Well, they had been illegally drilling oil from the Iraqi side, as they made special drills just to do it that would drill down diagonally instead of straight down. So they could be on the Kuwaiti side, but still be stealing oil from the Iraqi side. The Iraqis, kinda justifiably, were pissed. But they took their anger too far, as 4 weeks after this report, Iraq would invade all of Kuwait, taking over the nation in 4 hours. So, John is immediately flown to Washington, D.C., where he's escorted into the White House and is told to brief the president, George H.W. Bush, on the situation and what to expect, as, again, he is the foremost expert on Saddam Hussein, other than maybe Saddam's mother. Conveniently enough, John was also one of the world's leading experts on the Kuwaiti royal family. So this was really just a dream scenario for him, at least as far as multinational conflicts go. So according to Kiriakou, everyone enters the Oval Office, and as they settle down and it gets quiet, Bush rolls around and just goes, "Well, now what are we going to do?" So the president, vice president, and the director of the CIA all turn to face the 25-year-old kid sitting on the couch, and he explains them what he suspects Saddam Hussein will do next. After this, John would fly back to the Middle East, except this time to Saudi Arabia, where he'd work as the personal liaison between the United States government and the exiled Kuwaiti royal family. Also, you probably know about the coalition in Desert Storm, and how it's portrayed as this excellent use of global police force by the United States and its allies, in stopping one nation from bullying a smaller nation. But in reality, one of the main reasons we got involved was we didn't want Iraq to steal all of Kuwait's gold, which they had a ton of, and we just didn't want Iraq to have that much. So, you know the drill. America's military had been built up the last 50 years and had been itching to get something out in a conventional warfare setting. Stormin' Norman does his thing, Highway of Death happens, we basically win the war in a week, kill 200,000 Iraqis, and the military-industrial complex has been chasing this high ever since.
I did it because I liked it. Hell, I loved it. I'm sitting, I'm just itching. I'm itching to do it again.
So Kiriakou did excellent with his first deployment in the First Gulf War. And with this service, he got an upgrade in his deployment. He traded the barren deserts of Iraq with his native lands of Greece, where he would be deployed to Athens. Now, why would the CIA be interested in Greece? Well, they were one of the first governments they successfully overthrew after World War II when they stopped the communists from winning an election there. Well, communists kind of always held a grudge about that. A murderous grudge. Revolutionary Group Number 17 November, or 17N because no one wants to say that mouthful when they're describing their group, was founded in 1975 by a group of Marxist guerrillas. This was the same group that assassinated Richard Welch, whose assassination inspired John to become a CIA agent. And now, he was hunting them down. But it wasn't easy. John was dodging bullets and assassination attempts left and right, but mostly from the left, because they were communists. Get it? Anyways, John's work was instrumental in leading to the arrests of most of 17N's leadership, which it is funny because John describes his views as being pretty left-wing himself. Anyways, John was here from 1998 all the way up until 2001 when a certain tragedy happened.
9/11 Airlines. What a terrible name for an airline. It reminds me of that tragedy.
So after this, John demanded to be transferred back to the Middle East so he could help find who just attacked America. And at this point, he knew Arabic and had proven to be a very successful agent. So the CIA agreed. He would be sent to Pakistan and be the head counterterrorism officer for the whole country. His goal? Capture or kill Osama bin Laden, the most wanted man in the entire world at this time. But the Taliban and Al-Qaeda were primarily in Afghanistan, I can hear you say, hypothetical viewer. Well, back when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan in the 1970s and were beat back by the Mujahideen, helped with some Japanese guy. I made a video about that guy. You should definitely go check it out. I'm going to link it up here and watch it after this one. Thanks. Well, they were primarily trained and funded by Pakistani imams who created the Taliban that we know and hate today. So there were dozens of connections between these K fighters and people in Pakistan. And Kiriakou's job was to find links between them and bin Laden's current whereabouts. And on many occasions, he came pretty close. But the closest he ever got was one of these high-ranking individuals by the name of Abu Zubaydah, who was alleged to be the third highest-ranking member of Al-Qaeda and head of their intelligence programs. It's alleged by the Bush administration he was a key figure in planning the U.S. embassy bombings and the September 11th attacks of America. Which I believe him. I mean, look at this guy. He's got an eye patch. And Kiriakou led the assault to capture him. Abu was shot 3 times in the assault. Once in the thigh, another in the stomach, and the third one in the test. Pakistani doctors said that he wouldn't survive his injuries. But CIA said that wasn't good enough. So they flew in doctors from Johns Hopkins to save his life. Because what they had planned for him next would make this death seem merciful. And this brings up what John is most famous for now. But I'll touch on that in a second. He continued his service faithfully, still hunting for bin Laden until 2003. And it was here he was brought into another major briefing. Except this time, it was for Iraq again. This time, however, it wasn't going to be like Desert Storm where we got in and out. No. Iraq was trying to get a nuclear weapon, and we couldn't allow that to happen. So, we had to go in and enact regime change. And this is the only time this has ever happened in U.S. history and has zero parallels to modern U.S. politics.
What about people who say you're only interested in the Middle East for oil?
What? Huh? Oil? Who said something about oil, bitch? You cooking? Come on, yo, get out of here.
Anyways, John was anti-invading Iraq from the get-go because 1, what did this have to do with getting justice for 9/11? And 2, where were the WMDs? Which Kiriakou now does claim he has seen credible reports and recoveries of WMDs in Iraq, but they were buried in a desert and were chemical weapons, not nuclear weapons like the media widely reported. So, John didn't stay long after this, officially leaving the CIA in 2004. John would work in multiple fields, but mainly as a news correspondent on Middle East affairs and as a Senate investigator under Senator John Kerry. And he did all this until 2012, where he would be arrested. But why? Well, we gotta rewind back to 2006 and his capture of Abu Zubaydah. Remember how I said that this guy had it rough after his capture? Well, like John earlier in this video, that was an understatement. Abu would be relentlessly tortured for information regarding the whereabouts of bin Laden. He would be sleep deprived, locked in boxes, sprayed with freezing water, and most famously, waterboarded. Zubaydah would be waterboarded 83 times in the month of August in 2002 alone. Oh, he's still in prison, by the way. So he's still going through all this. And John was aware of all of these things happening because he got all of the communications related to anything that was related to Pakistan. Now, was torture legal? Absolutely not. But this wasn't torture. It was enhanced interrogation. This was a series of rough interrogation tactics used by the CIA to get information out of suspected terrorists. And this was all knowingly sanctioned and approved of by George Bush, Dick Cheney, and Nancy Pelosi. Here's the thing. Personally, I don't care. If you fly planes into our buildings, I don't care if you get waterboarded. So, hot take of the day. But I say all that to say that in an interview in 2006 that John was giving to ABC, he mentioned that Abu was being tortured by the CIA. And this was the first official acknowledgement that torture was being used on terrorists. Which, this itself wasn't illegal. But it pissed off a lot of people who now saw John as a rat. So they began to look for any reason to make an example out of him. And that moment came in a private interview where John unknowingly named an agent who was currently undercover. And the feds pounced on him. He was charged under the Intelligence Identity Protection Act, and he is one of 2 people to ever be charged under that act. But on top of that, he also had charges related to the Espionage Act. He faced 45 years in prison and millions of dollars in legal fees. All the while, the US government was denying his status as a whistleblower. John wanted to plead not guilty, but his lawyers thankfully convinced him to just accept a plea deal because the government was going to get their conviction on this one. So he only went away for 30 months. 18 senior officers in the CIA penned a letter to President Obama urging him to commute John's sentence and pardon him. But Obama never responded. John would be in prison for 2 years, where he had a pretty okay relationship with white supremacists and former Italian mob members in prison, until early 2015, when he would be released to house arrest for his final 3 months of prison. After this, Kiriakou still wanted a pardon because he couldn't get his CIA pension, which at this point would have been a considerable amount. In July of 2018, Kiriakou signed a $50,000 deal with Karen Giorno, a former campaign advisor to President Donald Trump, as payment for lobbying for a pardon, with the promise of an additional $50,000 if the pardon was granted, which this didn't work. But he managed to get the ear of Rudy Giuliani, who he had a lunch with, talked with him, and Rudy Giuliani demanded $2 million to get him a pardon, which John just laughed at him and said he's not going to spend $2 million to get $700,000. So he walked away, and to this day, he's not been pardoned. In the meantime, John would receive a plethora of awards, not only related to his service and being a whistleblower, but also related to the books that he's written. And over the years, John has appeared on many podcasts, ranging from Joe Rogan to Julian Dory. But here recently, he's been on an absolute tear. John is a fantastic storyteller with no shortage of stories to tell. And from what it seems, I think he's a good guy. Then again, he's trained to be one of the best liars in the world, so who knows? He's a lot more likable and trustworthy than that long-haired guy that was everywhere a couple of years ago. That I do know. I will say this. A lot of people don't think you ever get to leave the CIA. Not really. So is John just a retired guy who's sharing his stories and life advice with the world? Or is he on another mission, feeling out the public, planning ideas through funny stories, in another elaborate psyop pushed by the CIA manipulating algorithms? I don't know. All I know is, if somehow you're watching this, Mr. Kiriakou, I hope I did your story justice in this short video. And I want to thank you not only for your service, but also for helping me with the intro of the video. That was pretty cool. If you like this story about the CIA, I got another great one that I posted just last week, all about how we got in the current debacle that we're involved in Iran, because the CIA kind of messed that one up to begin with. So, yay. Other than that, I hope you enjoy whatever food you decided to eat, whatever poop you decided to poop when you sat down to watch this video. I'm Crate13, and I hope you have a blessed day. I cannot believe I paid so much money for that.